Smashing a part of human history, ISIL fighters destroy a priceless collection of artifacts in Mosul's museum. Just why is the group targeting ancient history? Are they misinterpreting religion? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Martine Dennis. Now, the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant has released yet another video that has sparked universal condemnation and shock around the world. Let's have a look at these pictures. Now, these are supposedly ISIL fighters in a museum in northern Iraq, in the city of Mosul, smashing statues one after the other. Look at that. And just note how this video is made. There are special effects and there are graphics. There's a man who's drilling into a sculpture of a winged bull, and the video really shows us the extent of the devastation. Now, artifacts include some which date back 3,000 years to the Assyrian Empire, totally smashed to pieces. And you can clearly see that they're using a sledgehammer and drills, turning the Mosul Museum from a collection of priceless antiquities into a pile of shattered fragments. Well, this isn't the first time that ISIL has gone after ancient remnants of culture and heritage. They've previously destroyed a number of shrines and holy sites in towns they've conquered. The group says it does this in the name of the Prophet. In the case of the Mosul Museum, they said the site held symbols of idolatry that ISIL had to get rid of. Well, cultural sites like the Mosul Museum have been targeted before. In 2001, the Taliban demolished the Bamiyan Buddhas in Afghanistan with dynamite, leaving these large gaping holes in their stead. The Buddhas had been carved in the 6th century and were well preserved by many different communities until the 2001 attack. Similarly, the Egyptian Museum in Cairo was looted in 2011. Priceless historical items from ancient Egypt were taken, and 70 artifacts, including 2 mummies, were damaged in the break-in. And there's Samarra in Iraq. Explosions at the Al-Askari Mosque destroyed the iconic Golden Dome that had been built in the year 944 and housed the tombs of 2 Shia imams. All right, let's hear now the thoughts of our guests. In London, we have Carol Kirsten, who's Senior Lecturer in the Study of Islam and the Muslim World at King's College London. In Oxford, we have Paul Collins, Curator of Ancient Near East at the Ashmolean Museum at the University of Oxford. And also in London, we have Ahmed Rushdie, Director of the House of Iraqi Expertise Foundation. Well, welcome to you all. And Carol, can I start with you and explain to us, seeing as you track the movements and the behaviours of ISIL so closely, why has ISIL particularly targeted the Mosul Museum?
Well, it seems to be a pattern indeed of jihadi organizations the world over, as you pointed out. The Taliban have done it in 2001. It happened also with the collection of manuscripts in Timbuktu when jihadis took control of parts of Mali. General, indeed, the argumentation is that idolatry is prohibited by Islam, and they claim that by destroying these artifacts, they prevent Muslims from falling into that temptation. In the case of ISIS, I think it's also very important to point out that it is part of another pattern, namely the very cynical operations manual they are applying, which goes by a very menacing title, the management of savagery, Idarat al-Tawahush, where all kinds of outrageous acts against people, as we have seen, but now also against heritage and artifacts, with the purpose of intimidating and polarizing not only Muslim societies, but basically also drawing in outside forces. And it forms part of a millenarian end-of-world agenda of a confrontation between Islam, along the lines, of course, how ISIS seeks to interpret that, and the forces of evil. And obviously ISIS is very confident it's going to come out on top. But it is definitely an attempt to polarize the world between people who sort of subscribe to narrow-minded literalist interpretations of Islamic scriptures and the outside world who watches these events with feelings of horror.
And Ahmed, can I come to you also in London? So ISIL has this monolithic interpretation of Islam. They invoke the name of the Prophet when they're carrying out these kinds of actions. What sort of impact is this having among Iraqis in the more narrow sense, and then more broadly among Muslims in different parts of the world?
Well, first of all, let's talk honestly about what's happened there. The governor of Nineveh, Athil Najafi, said clearly what's happened in Mosul Museum is that they destroyed the replicates, the originals. Most of them are in Baghdad. And we missed the originals that stayed there, which means that they destroyed the replicates and smuggled the others which are originals. This is first. Secondly, this museum was built in 1952, and it is contained not only the Ashurian, it's also the Gilitian, the Akkadian artifacts, which is belong to the 7th century BC.
But just to clarify, Ahmed, are you saying then that the destruction that we've seen with sledgehammers and drills, this was wrought on replicas? So in a way, the world shouldn't be quite as devastated as the reaction that we've witnessed over the last 24 hours.
And this is the most important thing. They want the world to react on what they are doing, which is not really happened. This is first. And secondly, if we are talking on Holy Quran, we are talking on the religious pathway, the Holy Quran always telling us about the stories of the old civilizations and saying, go and see the remnants, which means that the remnants must be there to be seen and to be taught by the people. This is first. Secondly, the rightly guided Khalifas, the Umayyads, the Abbasid, the Ottomans, all these empires that ruled the world by Islam didn't destroy any of these remnants. So why they are doing something like that? It is only extremism. Extremism always want to renew the history by demolishing all the past and saying to the people, now we are here, now the history of your life will begin starting from this point.
Okay, that's a very interesting point. Let me put that to you, Paul, because of course you study antiquities, and isn't this the right, in some respects, isn't this the right of the victor in any kind of conflict to determine what is history that remains and what is history that doesn't? You have the control over a people's history.
Oh, it's absolutely true that, of course, any victor has control over the past. What we haven't seen in the past, however, is anyone destroying the past. The cultural heritage of Iraq, like the cultural heritage of any part of the world, is about identity. It's about the roots of a people. It's about how they think of themselves. And so obliterating that evidence, no matter how old it is literally obliterating that sense of identity. So when we see these objects being destroyed, and indeed it's not just the material in the Mosul Museum we see on this video, we see the destruction of Assyrian monuments actually outside the museum at the site of Nineveh, as it were across the river from the Islamic centre of Mosul, those being hacked away and destroyed. I mean, this is cutting away at the identity of Iraq and the people of Iraq.
Now, the UN spokesman responding to the video that we've just been looking at said that a country without its history doesn't have a future. Is that something you'd agree with?
Well, I think that's probably absolutely true. I mean, the sense we all need a past to make sense of ourselves now. We need a reference point. Now, of course, for Iraq, that's a history that stretches back millennia, at least 5,000 years, if not longer, in terms of written history, and beyond deep into prehistory as well. So there's an enormous amount of material by which people can, as it were, shape themselves. And the Islamic identity of Iraq is the latest version of that.
And can I come to you now, Carol, and ask you a little bit more about the methodology used in this? There's a meticulous destruction involved. As I said, you know, using implements to smash, to wreak utter devastation here. But ISIL, it must be remembered, they're not immune to making a little bit of benefit out of artifacts, because we know that they've made a huge amount of money from the trading in the black market of antiquities, certainly from Iraq and as well from Syria.
Yes, indeed. Organizations like ISIS have a degree of cynicism when it comes to their actual operations, and are then perfectly happy making concessions in regards to their own interpretations of Islam. I would like to pick up on a point that Ahmed made in regards to the interpretation of Quranic injunctions and also the traditions of the Prophet in regards to pre-Islamic or non-Muslim civilizations. Looking at a few reactions from the Muslim world online this morning, the Fatwa Council of Egypt has already issued a statement where they exactly made the same point Ahmed brought forward, that the Quranic injunctions are not asking for the wanton destruction of heritage. On the contrary, indeed, they say these are worthy of admiration and respect because they point at pre-Islamic human civilization and a heritage that belongs to the whole of mankind. And equally, there were no instructions to the Muslim conquerors operating even during the days of the Prophet to destroy heritage. On the contrary, they were actually told to leave these things alone. So there is clearly already a reaction coming from the Muslim world, from a very respected body like the Fatwa Council in Egypt, which itself, of course, has a vested interest in protecting antiquities, because over the last few years, extremist Salafi organizations in Egypt have called for the destruction of the pyramids and the Sphinx. I mean, I think the attacks on the Egyptian museum you mentioned earlier were probably motivated by very similar opportunistic motivations of getting a hold of antiquities and sell them on the market rather than destruction of idols.
OK, well, let's, at this point then, have a look at a few other examples of lost or stolen history. It's not really limited to the Middle East, is it? Because there's, of course, the Elgin marbles, which were sculpted in Greece but whisked off to Britain in the early 1800s, where they remain to this day. The Greeks have repeatedly asked for this piece of their culture to be returned, but the British have so far refused. A German archaeologist found a bust of Nefertiti in 1912 and took it back to Berlin, but the Egyptian government says they were misled into giving up the sculpture and they want it back. And one of the largest diamonds in the world, the Koh-i-Noor, is claimed by many. It's currently housed in the crown jewels, actually, but Indian Sikhs and the Taliban are among those who say the diamond really belongs to them. Of course, there's also the instance of the Benin bronzes and Nigeria. But Paul, can I come back to you? As I say, as an expert in the study of antiquities, in this digital age when we, at the click of a mouse, can summon up an image of anything we like, there are 3D printers that can recreate virtually anything we like. Why are the real, authentic artifacts so important? Why do we invest so much significance in them?
Well, I think you've answered that question in a way through those words, real and authentic. Visitors to museums in this country have grown tremendously over the last years, despite the fact that the internet now allows you to investigate images from collections around the globe. What people want is a sense of the real. They want to come in contact with objects which have been crafted by people in the past, that have had meaning and relevance to people in the past, and then understand those stories in the context of their own world. A place where you can start to ask questions about your place in the world and its connections to the past, and indeed other cultures. I mean, if one thinks of the material that was shown being destroyed in the Mosul Museum, the statues there being smashed We're part of a culture which stretched along trade routes running from Iran through modern-day Iraq, through modern-day Syria. Palmyra was connected to those sculptures, and of course we hear about destruction at that site in Syria. So this is an interconnected world. So it's not just about the heritage of Iraq and the wider heritage of the world, but that interconnected history and the relevance that has for people. And that's what people come to museums to engage with, to think about those connections and about the real and authentic.
Now, can I pose a question to you all, actually, but can I start with you first, Ahmed, and this at a time when we're looking at more than 200,000 deaths among the Syrian people. We're talking about, by some estimates, almost 1 million Iraqi deaths. In this era of human suffering and carnage, should we really be concerned about the fate of antiquities, of relics, of ruins, when we're not even able to protect human life?
Well, if you want the answer, the real answer, I think it's very important to make this this accident, what's happened there in Mosul, as a way of a solution for international gathering against ISIS. On the other hand, it means that when we have international coalition, a military one, we need international coalition on educational, social, and even heritage one, which means that when the UN plus all the Arab states plus the whole world will stand against something like that, especially who destruct all these things or undisguised, which means that when the pictures of these men will be put in the whole world that they are the enemy of humanity, it will be a lesson first, and secondly, it will be a motive for the international coalition, even the military one, to go forward against ISIS, and they will get respect and also get the support of all the people, the Iraqis and the others. By the way, the victims of Iraq, the blood of the Iraqis, will be also a sign to stabilize heritage, which means that the Sunni, the Shia, the Kurds' bloods are now a heritage that will still unifying Iraq. And that's why it is very important to stabilize Iraq in a way that all these stolen things, all these destruction for the humanitarian heritage will be stopped by the cooperation of the international community with the Iraqis against ISIS on educational, social, heritage, and also military.
And Carol, can I come to you? And Ahmed said that he hopes that as a consequence of this atrocity that's been committed in Mosul, that this will add some impetus to the fight against ISIL and other forms of extremism. Is that likely?
That is quite possible. I think indeed the answer to your question can never be either or, but and. Both the loss of human life and the destruction of these artifacts cause irreparable damage to a country's heritage and its psyche. And there is something very disconcerting about what ISIS is doing now, both in terms of the loss of human life and now also heritage. It's reminiscent of Pol Pot's Khmer Rouge and its Year Zero policy of the 1970s, which was also designed to the wanton destruction of a people and its heritage and basically impose a very dystopian future for that country. Hopefully, indeed, this kind of outrage will rally the people, indeed, against the savagery that has been perpetrated against human life and the material heritage of Iraq.
And Paul, it's quite rare, isn't it, for you to hear a universal howl of outrage and indignation at the scenes that we've all witnessed now in Mosul. Do you think that what we've seen in Mosul actually spreads, the impact actually spreads far beyond the Middle East, far beyond Iraq and Syria, but affects us all?
Well, it does. I mean, it reminds me, of course, of what happened in 2003, the moment that the Iraq Museum in Baghdad was looted. And of course, in exact parallel, exactly the same time, the museum in Mosul was being looted. I mean, enormous damage, objects stolen, removed, and the effect on the international community was extraordinary. The impact on understanding the destruction of a culture is such a powerful force that, of course, along with the genocide of people, this is the genocide of culture. And the two, as Carol just said, go hand in hand. You can't separate them. They are both extraordinarily terrible things, and ISIS, in a way, is elevating both of those to extraordinary levels. So yes, you know, the destruction of culture does move beyond the boundaries of a nation, and it is our heritage. It is global heritage.
And Ahmed, again, talking to you as an Iraqi and from a very personal point of view, Iraq, your country, has taken so many knocks, hasn't it? And it looks as though they're not going to stop for the foreseeable future. How do you foresee the future, the slightly mid-term future, if you like, for Iraq, for your country? Do you see it remaining as one country? Do you see it splitting up into separate entities? How do you see the future for Iraq?
Well, it's not me optimistic. It's the Iraqis always optimistic for the future. Now, I will be more optimistic if the international community take its own responsibility on heritage way, humanitarian way, military way, not only on one aspect, the military, and it does not do anything, which means that the collaboration of the human race, again, extremism can be made on the type of something like ISIS. So what we need as Iraqis, if we're gonna be optimistic for the future, is the help of the international community, the help of the UN, the help of the surrounding countries, which means that at the end, if Iraq destroyed, it will not be stopped on Iraq. It will be distributed in the whole world. And we all know that ISIS is become as an international threat. It's not only on Iraq or Syria.
And Paul, we've seen this time and time again, haven't we, throughout history, where historical artefacts and antiquities have been plundered, have been destroyed. We've seen, unfortunately, massive loss of life throughout the years at different periods in time. It doesn't necessarily mean the end of a civilization, does it? It sounds very much from what Ahmed is saying that Iraq is certainly down, but it's not out.
Well, of course, culture does reflect a sense of unity. The museums themselves in Iraq really sum that up so well. A museum in Mosul, a museum in Baghdad, a museum in Basra, which when they were flourishing were sharing materials. So wherever you went in Iraq, you got a unified history, a sense of identity which stretches back over those millennia wherever you stood in Iraq. And chipping away at that, of course, does undermine that sense of nationhood and identity. But as always, you know, from destruction, new forces arise, new ways of organising society arise. And so certainly humans are incredibly resilient. The point is that we shouldn't use past destructions as either a justification of what's going on now or a way of shaping the future.
And Carol, the final word to you for this programme. ISIS or ISIL or IS, whatever you want to call them, their aim is to shock and to horrify. They've succeeded, haven't they?
They have succeeded in doing that. At the same time, we have to point out that ISIS or Daesh is not representative of the Muslim mainstream. Islamic history has seen its fair share of extremist movements, but I think we also have to realize that Muslims and also Islam as a civilization are vibrant and have always managed to bounce back.
Thank you very much indeed. Carol Kirsten will end on an upbeat note. Thank you very much. Carol Kirsten in London, Paul Collins in Oxford and Ahmed Rushdie also in London. Thank you all very much indeed. And of course a big thank you for joining us, because You can add anything you'd like to this conversation by going to our programme page at aljazeera.com. You can post your comments at our Facebook page, facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And there's always the Twitter sphere at AJ Inside Story. I'm Martine Dennis, and from the whole team, bye for now.